Facebook's been down all day.
It's up now.
It's up now.
It's back up.
Oh, is it when they come up?
Right around 6 o'clock, I started getting things, and it was all up.
Oh, all right.
6:30 on the dot, according to my iPad. Can you get that clock fixed? Let's call the meeting to order. Pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Union City School Board Committee of the Whole meeting for the month of October. Once again, I'm pinch hitting for Ms. Searles, who happens to be here. He had prophecy on the computer over there, so hello, Jen. I'm not going to read the opening statement. Are there any public comments this evening before we start our committee of the whole? Oh, we had somebody flinch, but no. Okay. Moving the discussion item. Superintendent's goals. We had a discussion last meeting about the fourth one was the only one to talk about. So we've got some more information about that.
Yes, yes. Actually, what I ended up doing, because I spent a lot of time thinking about the fourth one and how I could, what we could do to evaluate it, I ended up deciding to take it out and put something different. So you see the fourth one that's there now. It's another goal that I have, something that we have to get done this year that is more measurable, like the first three, which is to develop and implement a plan to complete the Sinking from the few initial Sinking Fund projects like the alumni field bleachers, the middle school boiler, parking lots, et cetera, over the next 1 to 2 years. And I actually had a meeting this morning with a gentleman from Performance Services to start talking about that. They're going to have some, he's just one person, one company that I've talked to. They're going to actually come down Thursday and do some looking around. And they have what's interesting about their process, they are a design build company. So they, you don't have a separate architect that does all the design. It's everything designed in detail up front. And then you send the whole project out for bids. Instead, you hire them. Well, actually, you don't hire them up front, but you work with them, and then they will design as you go through the process of identifying what you're going to do and how you're going to make it. They can check pricing, give you ideas as you go along, and then they bid out everything to subcontractors, and then they manage the project all the way from start to finish. So you don't end up with two different companies that one that designed it, one that actually handled the construction, and then trying to debate between the two is one company that does all the work. And they also work very quickly. I'm really concerned about getting the projects underway and done, the things we want to do next summer, because just like everything we're dealing with, every time we order something, it's months away, and getting equipment and having workers to do jobs. And he confirmed that today. He said that right now they're seeing it's beginning to struggle to even be able to identify subcontractors for next summer because there just aren't employees available to do the work. And now with the governors, not just the governors, but the federal infrastructure bill coming down, apparently the governor, the state has about 10% of the ESSER funds that they are putting out into $250 million worth of projects. It's just going to become incredibly difficult to get people to do this kind of work over the next couple of years, and also much more expensive. The jobs are much more expensive right now. So he indicated to me that they could have something in place and a price set as quickly as within anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks from now. they move that quickly. So, I've gotten a couple recommendations from different other schools about different builders, and I know the ones that we've worked with in the past. Jonesville superintendent, they're working with this company right now. And I checked in with him and he recommended them. That's kind of where that's at. I didn't see how close they're when I meet with them. But getting all these things that we want set up ahead of time, and so that we know when they're going to be completed, it's going to be a big job this year. Especially the bleachers, that's huge. So that's what I did with it. If this meeting was noticed to discuss these, and if you want me to, if you have a different goal in mind, we talked about different things before that other meeting. If you have a different goal in mind, I'm happy to look at any of those.
The only concern I have is that some of these kind of cross over each other, and they all seem to be focusing on the same area. So maybe it's really nothing to do with our staff or our students. That's my concern with looking at these 4 goals.
I understand that. If you have ideas, suggestions about the previous goal, of how to measure that, or if you have a different goal in mind, I'm really trying to focus this year on, which is what the 4th goal is about, building leadership, allowing, supporting the principals and being the leaders in their buildings. And I've already made some changes in terms of structure, organizational structure, to make that happen. We're going to be making more changes as we get to move along through the year. We can survey the teachers or the staff members that work in the building about what's going on and how they feel they're being led, but that doesn't directly reference what I might have done to enable the principals in that.
I can interrupt.
Yeah.
I guess I was thinking more broader scale, like employee retention or student retention, if that would reflect a positive environment that people want to come to work, want to send their kids to school. I don't know what metric would be best for them. Obviously, student count is a metric that could be used, and percent employees retained, and you can get people that want to retire, that changes things too. But I don't know, that may be more appropriate just to get something in there to drive you towards those goals, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think, obviously some of the main things that we were concerned about outgoing was obviously the facilities and making sure those were all up to date. So I think some of these are very good, but at the same time, I definitely think that seeing something like that on paper would look nice, even though I know our district goals are more student focused, as far as those go. I mean, those are more student driven, but yeah, I would like to possibly see something in there that actually reflects kind of what Darren was saying. I didn't really have anything in mind, but I like that idea of, a lot of the big concerns in the community with student retention and making sure that our population stayed. And obviously we want to keep high quality caliber teachers here in Union City, which I know you've done some things to make that possible already. We've been working toward that, but I also think that something like that would look better on, just for you personally.
Right. Well, could I just interject then for a second?
Sure.
And Jen and Amber that were there when we discussed my contract in June. One of the things that when we talked about this part of my contract is really these refer to part of my contract, the 4 goals that I have, that there is bonus pay attached to each one of these. And one of the things we talked about was that in establishing these goals was that they would not be things that where we would measure things like, you know, if our student enrollment goes down, then they didn't meet the goal. In other words, it would be based on my actions, things I can do, things I can control, decisions I make, and not necessarily out of the fact that this year, you know, 10 students decided to leave. I'm happy to talk about goals like that, and having a goal that more of our students graduate, or whatever. All those are great goals, the things we want to do. But in terms of these goals specifically, I would like them to be things that I have control over.
I want to add the same thing. I was just thinking the same thing you went through it. We live in a climate right now that is very difficult to be able to credit or not credit the superintendent for things that happened around us this year. People are making decisions about going to school, not simply by what the superintendent does or even the teacher does. They're making decisions on government issues that are higher than us. And to be able to flag those and to be able to come up with a realistic, this year at least, to see why our population is dropping, why it's increasing. Some of these things are going to be on the superintendent, teacher's control, custodian's control, and things like that.
I don't disagree that student count may not be the right metric. I was just throwing ideas out there. The employee side might be easier for more impact.
Even graduation rates will depend on how many days the school is open, and like last year, it just seems that everything dropped on us, and it may straighten out this year, but I don't think this is the year to be able to look at that as a superintendent.
I mean, if you want to talk about, you know, communication, I can demonstrate, show you the things I've done for communication. I mean, anything that I can, where I can give examples, demonstrate the different steps I've taken to accomplish that. I'm open to that, and I really didn't. I'm just gonna be blunt. I really didn't even want to have these in my contract. I wanted it to just be a flat contract, and because there are many more things than these that I'm going to be focused on, and many more things that I think are even more important than these. And whether these were in the contract or not, these are things that need to be done and I'm willing to do. And so I'm just doing this because that's the way my contract is structured. And so I have all kinds of plans and things that we're trying to work on, that I'm trying to work on. A lot of them are just in the back of my mind right now because, frankly, I'm just trying to get through these first few months and get to a point where I can slow down and actually think about the future a little more. I mean, every day has basically been one thing after another. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that anything that I can do that you want me to work on, I'm willing to put in here. I just would like to do something that I can, demonstrate. And that was the reason when I put the other one in, that's probably one of my most important goals. The one about empowering the principals to be leaders in the building and supporting them. And I really want the staff that work in the building to identify them as the leader of their team and to feel like they run the building, they're in charge of it. And I want to do whatever I can to enable that to happen. And things like having different people, all the people that work in their building report to them. There's some things I want to do with regard to the budget process and so on that I want to work with them on. And there are just a number of things. But
Chris, can you hear me?
yeah.
So when we met this summer, I think it was really important for the board representatives that we had some, I'm going to call them 30,000 foot view items, that we just needed some deliverables that we could say, okay, that progress is being made. So number one of your goals that you mentioned was a site plan. We just don't have a site plan yet. We've been asking for it for, I think, 4 years. Another one is a plan for curriculum. Another one was a plan for special ed. And I think finances might have been included in that as well. And so when I think about the last goal that you had about the principals, that to me is really about the MASB evaluation. We're gonna hit those things when we do your larger evaluation.
Okay.
But for these 4 goals, I think they, in my mind anyway, it was some very specific, this year, here's what I'm gonna get done, and did I get it done or didn't I? And I agree with you. It is not tied to students, it's not tied to other staff, it is directly tied to, did you deliver this product? And I thought that these goals would be about identifying what those products were gonna be. Am I off base or?
No, I understand. One of the goals that I was talking about earlier today was related to, as I was considering how to address that 4th one, I decided I really needed to replace it. One of them was around curriculum and getting our curriculum aligned and having it in a documented, available place, whether it be, I don't know what software or how we would structure it, but some place that you could go where you would know each classroom, what they were, what the benchmarks were that they were focused on, and what the resources were that they had to use for each individual classroom. And that's something that I want to work on and do this year.
So, I like that.
Okay.
Maybe the 4th goal.
I was gonna say the same thing. I think I would recommend that you make that your 4th goal.
Okay.
Because really, number 4 is really part of number 3 to me. You have to know what your short-term things are before you can decide what your long-term things are.
Sure.
It's decision-making that you're making as a whole from the same list of things that you want to accomplish. So I would definitely go with trying to get your curriculum.
A wise
taken
person
there.
advised me to go with that one earlier today, and I should have listened to her.
Is she in this room right now?
Yes, she is.
Either.
Right.
What's that, Jen?
Don't bite off more than you can chew, is what she said.
Yeah.
Well, this is.
I've already done that. That's too late.
I agree with you that it would be great to walk into every classroom and every grade level and every content area. That's not happening in 1 year. So what's the deliverable gonna be at the end of this year to know that we're making progress in the next 3 to 5 to get to that point? That's what
Okay. That would probably be to have the structure in place, the foundation for how it's all going to be built and stored, and then to have, I would say, probably at grade levels, especially elementary is fairly easy, even middle school, benchmarks for each of those. I think those are accomplishable this year. But it's going to be an ongoing project. It's something that's going to take a couple of years to get in place.
Can I ask a question? Because things have changed so much since I left. Are state benchmarks the ones that are being used?
Yes.
So the benchmarks are in place?
Yes.
So we have to see if we're meeting those benchmarks.
Well, but what we need to do is when you look at the benchmarks, for instance, for 3rd grade math, there are so many of them.
I know.
Many, and so we try to focus on what are the
Power.
yeah, that was the word I was going to say. But when I got to it.
It's all good.
The power benchmarks, the ones that we're really going to focus on, we need to identify those. And it's not as it's easier to do. That's why I said we probably could do the elementary. I think it's easier to do when it's a self-contained classroom where it's, but when you start to get a little bit higher up and get into the high school, there's a lot more variability in terms of what gets taught where, what classes, and so, you get into other classes that aren't in the state, that don't have state benchmarks, and even some of the elective classes we have in high school, and so to get everything put together, to be able to identify those for each classroom is going to take a lot of work and a long time to do. And I don't want to do it just to say we did it either. Going through the process and having people go through the motions to put this together, I've seen too many things like that over my 37 years. Where, okay, we did this and now it's, we go through, we spend a year or 2 years doing this thing and then it's actually filed away somewhere. Nobody ever looks at it again. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know really well what you're talking about. I did it.
And so if we're going to do this, I want it to be done in a way where it's actually part of what we do every day, so that it's no longer just something that is just out there and we know it's there, we did it, yay, and then we don't think about it.
What I'm trying to say is that, and I'm speaking from not knowing what's going on now, is that if you have some benchmarks that are realistic benchmarks for every place, we have a starting point, and then you can report back at the end of the year how far you progressed along to meeting that particular benchmark that you've set. And that's a measurable way of doing it. It would seem in the most logical way, because you're meeting state benchmarks. You're reporting to us each year what you've done to meet that benchmark and where you are on it.
Absolutely.
That to me seems like the most logical way of accomplishing all the things they're saying. Am I right?
Sounds good.
And I am a person, I'll tell you, when I taught, I said the same thing. Whatever they came down with from the office, I could shuffle my program to meet it.
I know you could.
You remember that, don't you?
Oh yeah, very well.
You remember it, Amber? Yes.
What I was gonna say is regarding curriculum, if you're gonna do it curriculum-wise, perhaps something you do is have each grade or something like that put together what their benchmarks are. What are the things that they have to work for their year? What are the resources that they will be using? What books will they be reading throughout the year? That way it's there available for parents or public to see. It's also there in case someone has to leave unexpectedly. The next person coming in can look at that site, say, oh, this is what they use for resources, these are the books they're reading, this is the math they're going to go over this year, these are where they need to meet their benchmarks, this is where they were last year, we're trying to get them here.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I want to do, and I'm not going to be the one. I'm not going to be the one deciding what in third grade math, what resources. It's got to be those people
Right,
that are doing
exactly.
it. They're going to be the ones that we're putting that together. What I need to do is make sure that when we do it, that it's done in a way that makes sense, that will be useful to them, because teachers get put through things that they have to do that are not ever useful to them often. So I don't want to move forward with something unless I know that as they do that work, that they're going to be able to use that. And a lot of them have already done a lot of this kind of work, so it's a matter of organizing it and putting it together in a way that it's easily accessible for new people, for parents, for students, for everyone.
And standardize is how it looks.
Yes.
Where you can find it. I know that if I go to this page, I need to look at this section, it's under this heading, that type of thing. It really needs to be easier to use.
Yeah, and one thing I've already found just in these 3 months is that some people have been getting by in their classrooms and doing things without adequate resources for what they're trying to do. Some people go out and buy things on their own. Some people have a way of or are aggressive about obtaining what they need, and others just go along. And I think, for instance, some of our science equipment is incredibly outdated. really need to address that. So hopefully as we get through this process and we're identifying not only the benchmarks for the classroom, but also what resources are they using, what books, what websites, what online services we're paying for. And that part of that will also be any tools, equipment, supplies that they're using. And then making sure that they have what they need and that they have adequate supply of it, and that they also feel, empowerment is a big thing to me. I want people to feel like they can step up and speak for themselves. And people have to do that. I mean, they have to be able to step forward and know they're going to be listened to and say, I need this. This is not right now. And that, we listen to it and try to do it. And so that's all part of that.
Another thing I can add to that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we're making general goals and objectives for you, and if we simply talk about the benchmarks that are important, then you report back at the end of the year what you're doing to meet that benchmark. Everything you're talking about right now would fall under that report back to us. If we try and make everything we're talking about, it'll be a book. We have to have a broad goal, and then you report back to what you're doing to meet that goal. And if it's a science goal of some sort, you say, well, this year we upgraded our science equipment, we did this, that would be in your report to see if you met that goal and how close you are to meeting the goal. That particular benchmark that's selected, and you'd have to sort of pick the benchmark out in front of you that you were going to work on, and then report back to us how you met those benchmarks that a state set. Am I correct in what I'm saying?
I think a little bit. I think the first phase of what we're trying to do here is getting these benchmarks in place so that everybody, all the teachers, know exactly what it is and also have what resources they have, and so that everyone has access to that. Now, when we get to that point where we have that, then we're going to have to look at what areas, what's something we're always doing. What areas are we not meeting the standards, the academic standards that we're trying to reach? And then how can we address that particular area so that we're meeting those benchmarks, and what improvements do we need to make in resources, personnel, equipment, et cetera.
This sounds like a lot of work, and I don't want the teachers to do a bunch of work. We're going to change the backbone of the system in terms of how it's found, how it's organized. So is it appropriate to have the goal for you to figure out how it's going to look, how it's going to be found, who's going to, the whole structure of it, and then maybe next year the teachers would go in and fill in all the blanks in terms of their specific work.
I agree that that's the first part of the process, is getting it structured, getting that aspect in place. But I do think that we will probably be able to begin working on some of those parts of it before the year ends. So I can write the goal to be focused on the structure and the design and the process, if you'd like that to be for this year. But I do anticipate that we will be able to start working on the other parts of it.
I have no problem with you exceeding the goal. I just want to make sure that you don't make a goal that everyone's not attainable. Well, if you guys get a bonus, you guys get a bonus. That's not the issue. The issue is I don't want people to work on something that
Absolutely.
is still changing.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, fill this worksheet with all the stuff you're doing. Oh wait, now it looks like this. Oh, okay. I don't want that.
Absolutely. There's no doubt.
So,
I'm a newbie, and so what I expected, I'm a very detail-oriented person. Being a businesswoman, I have to prioritize all the time, and it shifts and changes. And this is a year that's very difficult again. I realize that. What I was expecting is just that this was this year's goals, right? Am I correct? And so what I was looking for, I'm glad Jen said that, because that was exactly what I was looking for, was the things that we had talked about a few weeks ago, and we said what some of our priorities were. And so we've all chatted a lot here, we went all over the place, but I guess what I'm looking for is to maybe try to bring it back down, because these are 5-year budget plan. I don't want bleachers sliding down the wall, down the hill. So I think, again, maybe we need to encourage you to go back a little bit and just what you can achieve this year, as what the real priorities that you see and feel is going on with all the feedback you're getting now in this process. Shuffle through. I do better by seeing some clear, like we said, benchmarks on these and saying this is what I want to make sure we achieve. That's just the way my brain works. I really think that we made a lot of emphasis. We talked a lot about our special needs and our curriculum, and I realized we've got some cool things in place. And so I realized some of this is I was really impressed with that job the other day when you were talking about it, that opening that would be so focused on curriculum. It's really exciting. So I know some of this stuff is in place, but maybe some of the wording in some of these really would more focus on exactly what you're going to do would help me. I just think that would work a little better.
So you're talking about, for instance, looking at the ESSER funds. You want more actual specifics of what
Yes.
we're going to do with the funds?
Yes.
Isn't that part of the plan, though, that's supposed to be developed?
These are developed and planned,
See, if I
prepared.
already have all that figured out, I can just, but that's what my goal is, to give you that plan, so that by the end of the year, you'll be able to see all those things.
Okay.
You'll know exactly what we're gonna do. Now, some of the things we'll start working on as we're going through it. And this is not something that I'm going to show up the last week of the year and say, okay, here it is now. This is something that's going to take place. For instance, just working with the ESSER funds, we're already spending ESSER funds on some things. But my problem is that things come up and we think, oh yeah, well, we can use ESSER funds for that. And that's true. And there are things that we need to do. But I don't like that we just are putting things into doing things with that money. I want a full plan. And so Sarah and I have talked quite a bit about how when she's done with the audit stuff, and which is, we'll be getting the audit report coming up, and I get through this first part of the year, how the contract's done, and most of them I want them to do, but and get kind of those things resolved. I want to sit down with her and have a better understanding of all the nuts and bolts of our budget, and I mean very detailed. Darren saw a spreadsheet I was working on for wages, and I'm doing that for all the different wages. I want to be able to know exactly how much money we have and where we're putting all those dollars. And the same thing is true with the ESSER funds. So I'm going to give you the plan. I'm going to get into the details, but it's going to take me some time. And that's really what my goal is over the course of this year. That as we build that, I'll be coming to you and say, okay, these are things that we definitely have as a priority. This is where we stand right now. And it'll be developed over the course of the year, so that when the year is done, we will have a plan to use what funds remain in the ESSER funds through 2024, which is when we have the last of them. It might be wise for some of those to not jump in and try to do them right now or next summer, because the prices are just so high. So we might decide that because we don't have to spend all the money right now, which is what everyone is doing. They're all diving in and spending that money, getting projects set up, and that drives the cost up. So we may decide maybe we need to wait a little bit until the prices are going to be so high. Maybe it'll be 2 years from now. I'm not saying that's for certain, but we're going to have to be very careful about how we do that. So, you know, I hope, I don't know if I'm explaining myself right, if you
No,
understand what.
Just because I'm new and trying to figure it out, so I'm asking the question, so it's really just an overview is where we're at right now, you're just giving us an overview. And then as we go, you're saying we'll get more details, and then we'll be able at the end, we do the eval at the end. of the
Yeah,
year.
right,
Okay.
in June, so for instance, under the 5-year budget plan, I don't want us to be going year to year, looking at our budget, and this year we have to cut it, next year we have to, I want to be able to make some projections out for 5 years about, you know, what we think is happening to our enrollment, what we think is, state aid is going to be, and, how our staff is structured, because the thing about staff is if your enrollment's going down, if your revenues are declining, the worst thing you can do is be overstaffed, even for 1 year, because every year you keep that staff person in place, because you think, well, maybe it'll come back, maybe next year it'll get better. But what happens is that multiplies, so the next year when you do have to cut, you have to cut twice as much. You know, this year maybe we have to cut $100,000. But if we don't cut $100,000 this year, we think, well, maybe next year will be better. Then next year you have to cut $200,000 because it's doubled up. Now you're another 100,000 deeper in the hole. So I would like to have an ongoing plan that we can project out where we're going to be. So when we make decisions about increasing staff, it's not just, oh, we're adding staff because we have money this year. What about next year? What about the year after that? Where is that going to put us? And make sure that we're the right size, the right structure for where we are right now.
So, I should have left this, but I have to be with like the 10 to my daughter meeting, so
Okay.
we keep moving. I think, and we haven't talked about district goals yet. I think we all can agree that something around curriculum makes sense for a board goal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And I kind of hit the nail on the head with the student piece too, so.
What's that?
I said that, you know, you and I kind of brought in that student piece as well, and I think that kind of adds to that. You know, actually brings some significance to that, so now we're kind of hitting everything.
So yeah, I can rewrite that on the curriculum plan.
So,
And I like the idea too, there's a starting point for a new superintendent, that we use the words develop, prepare, that we're developing a plan that we can look at. I think that's the best place to start. And and this wording seems to be pretty good, and I go along with the fact that we want to use the fourth one as curriculum, I'm fine with that.
we just have to agree on what the deliverable is. Is it the structure and or is it the actual everything? I think we talked about not one each year.
Everything would not be doable in a year. Everything, as I see where we're going to go. So let me give some thought to that and write something up, and then I can set it out to everyone. And then we'll bring it to the October meeting to approve at that point. Does that work?
Works.
That's great.
All right. Anything else on the superintendent goals discussion item? Okay. Moving on to board goals, and we have to discuss something before we get to board goals. So there's really two schools of thought. One is we should have board goals that the board is responsible for, that involves the board, or the board has control over directly. Like the board will be trained in MASB by a certain date, or things like that. Then there's district goals. So we can discuss either one, but I think my personal opinion is we need to have district goals that everyone's shooting for, that from the top down, we can all say these are our goals for the year that we're all working on, instead of just what the board should be doing. My personal opinion, I'm open for feedback. So district goals versus just board goals.
I like adding district goals.
In the past, I know that we've used district-wide goals, and I think that is a better place for us to be because it's ultimately up to decisions that we have either approved or the policies that we've approved that allows the district to work the way it does, correct? So as a result, I think it's better to look at it district-wide rather than just the 7 people at the table.
What are TFI, tiered fidelity inventory? What is that? It's down on 4 or 3A.
No,
You
this,
said
this
TFI.
sheet is what I put together after the last meeting as a revision of what you had for last year, updated, and I made some changes and some things, so these are just suggestions, okay?
I kind of like them, I just want to know what TFI was, so I can evaluate this particular paper. This tiered fidelity inventory.
Okay, it's a tool that is provided by the PBIS company, the Swiss company. Okay, it's a tool that we use with our students to determine whether or not we're implementing PBIS with fidelity. In other words, whether our implementation of PBIS is being done properly or whether there need to be adjustments made.
This PBIS.
Positive behavior intervention and support. That's what we're
So
using.
this is a behavioral goal?
Yes, yes. The previous goal that the board had there last year talked about number of referrals, that the number of referrals would go down. And I've had conversations with James about this, and we talked about it again today. Looking at the number of referrals going down doesn't seem to me to be a goal that is something that we can easily work with our teaching staff on. And the reason I say that is, if I go to the teaching staff and I say, look, one of our goals is to decrease the number of referrals this year, some people are going to hear me saying to them, you need to stop sending so many kids to the office. And that is not what we're trying to say. What we're really looking at is we want behavior to improve. So rather than look at goals as decrease the number of referrals, we want to look at how effective are the referrals, the process we're using, the interventions we're using with those kids, how effective are they being at changing behavior. And so under 3A there, the tiered fidelity inventory, what it does is it looks at whether or not we are implementing the different tiers in the process, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, whether we're implementing those properly in the way they should be implemented. And that if we can move closer to a goal, and what James, who is our resident expert on this, says 85% is the goal we're supposed to be looking at. Last year last year we were at 60% in the elementary. I'm trying to remember these. We were at 60 in the elementary. We were at 53 in the middle school and 47 in the high school on the inventories. Those were our scores. And so we set goals. James and I talked about goals that were just a little bit higher than that to try to bring up those scores up to get closer to 85%.
In English, so I can follow what you're talking about.
Yes.
What does it mean when you say that you met this TFI goal of 70% at the elementary school? What's being measured? They're going to send kids to the office? What's being measured to be able to get these percentages?
What's being measured is that students, and I wish James could be here tonight, but he, for whatever reason, he had a family thing, so he couldn't be here tonight. But what's being measured is by talking to students about what's happened or through the process, or teachers about what process is taking place when there was a behavior incident. Is it being handled the way, in other words, if the student says, this is what happened, boom, 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 this is through the incident, okay? Or we look at what we've actually done, doesn't match what we should have done. In other words, are we taking the steps that we should be taking with the students according to the PBIS model? maybe I'm not, can someone else, one of you explain that
So
better?
some of the characteristics are kind of like, you have a PBIS team where there's a representative from every single grade level on the team, you have a parent representative. At the older levels, it's having a student on that team. One of the things is sending out your minutes from your meetings whenever you meet, sharing those minutes with people, surveying your students, surveying your staff, your students, your parents.
Students being able to tell you what
Yeah.
what rocks.
Kids being able to say what ROC stands for and what ROCs looks like in each of the areas that you have that in the building.
Just quickly, so I appreciate your help here. If a student misbehaves in class and is sent out, there are steps that this process says you have to go through.
This is
No.
positive behavior support, so it's, before problem behaviors occur, what are we doing to set kids up so they understand the rules and expectations? They're recognized for their, continued efforts to meet those expectations. It's more proactive than the reactive behavior pieces that you're describing.
So if I get 70%, it means everything was done.
No.
Maybe I should talk to you after
So let's go back a step. I mean, agree with one, district goals and not board goals. We kind of went off on a tangent. Okay, good. Step one. Okay, so now let's look at district goals. So I think it makes sense to be financially responsible if it, does anyone have any other suggestions about changing goal one? I think it's maybe avoidably, but I think it's important.
I think it's a good one to have.
So we're all focused on not spending the school to the ground. Okay,
Correct.
that's good. Okay, number two, student achievement. Now this is where we need some feedback from people on what's a good goal. I do think we need to have, bless you. Two now, we got one more left.
One more, but
Okay.
it's
Still in the chamber?
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. Student achievement is important, so let's discuss if this is an appropriate goals to have, how we want to do it.
Well, A carries over, and that's still kind of like something we had last year.
That was what we did last year.
Yes. So I still think that's a very important goal to get. I mean, this is very general, but very important.
That's why we're here, right?
Right.
B is good. It's graduation.
Okay. Is that number appropriate for our
That's-
demographic? Is it
Has
not?
that changed? Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, what have the graduation rates been the last few years? Because I don't know if they were.
The last 2 years, well, see, there is, and I made some changes to this from what was in there before, because there are multiple graduation rates for each class. There's a 4-year rate, 5-year rate, and a 6-year rate. So when the students enter as a freshman, the state actually calculates your graduation rate. How many of those students, what percentage graduate in 4 years? What percentage graduate ultimately in 5 years, and what in 6 years? Then the last 2 years, our graduation rate has been and for the 4-year has been 85.7, and I think 85.1. The last 2 years in a row. But when it goes out to 5-year and 6-year, it goes up from there. So it's been closer to, I think one of those years was over 90%, like 93%.
So how will the Charter Academy fall into this goal? Does it fall into this goal?
It does in a kind of a mixed way. The way that the graduation rate is, it's calculated on is it looks at your students that entered, for instance, the students that entered this year as freshmen, or either entered in our district or another district as freshmen. When they are in our school at the end of their senior year, if they graduate at 4 years, or if they don't graduate at 4 years, that is what gets factored into your graduation rate. So for instance, suppose we have a student who's in Athens right now and enrolls in our district for his senior year. If he does not graduate, that will go against our graduation rate. But it's based on the fact of when did he originally enroll in school. So if a student is in school this year as a senior, but they actually began as a freshman 5 years ago, they won't count against our graduation rate for this year. They will count against the graduation rate for the previous year's class, the 5-year cohort. So they call it the 4-year cohort, 5-year cohort, and 6-year cohort. So the only thing that counts on your graduation rate for any given year, what most people think about as graduation rate, are how many students that were enrolled in your district their senior year, and you were the last school that had them, that could claim them. It began 4 years ago. How many of them graduate and how many don't? That's what your graduation rate is counted on. If we have a student here as a freshman, and they're here all 4 years, and in March, they leave our district and go to Athens, they're on Athens' graduation rate now, not on ours.
So back to my question though, so the Charter Academy kids, they are considered in that same graduation cohort
If they began
if
four,
they began 4
yes.
years? Okay,
yes,
right. I didn't know if that was a separate, like, number or a separate data point that was out there.
I see what you're saying. They're set up, they're not set up as a separate building, they're set up as part of our high school. So yes, they will count either for or against our graduation rate. So it doesn't really matter where a kid starts. The only thing that matters is who was the last one to have them on the day they were supposed to graduate. And that's how it gets calculated. So when I looked at our 4-year graduation rate over the last 5 years, we've ranged anywhere from 91 down to 85. And so I kind of picked 88, right in the middle, that as a 4-year graduation rate, we'd like to reach 88. But you do have to remember when you talk about setting a goal for graduation rate like this, when you're in a school district our size, to get 88, to drop down to 88%, only takes 1 or 2 students. I mean, out of, like last year, we had 53 graduate, or 53 seniors, and 46 or 7 graduated. Come on, Amber.
Yeah, somewhere numbers, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's what gave us our, so, you know, if one of those students that graduated didn't graduate, now instead of 85%, we're down to 83%. And a lot of times we don't even have control over those. Look, that could be a student that moved in here in January and then a week later dropped out of school. If they attend here one day and then drop out of school, they go against our graduation rate. So, but
I understand it's difficult to control, but if we can get it on there, I think 88 is a fair number.
Agreed.
Next. Student achievement C, we dropped the old NWA requirement and replaced it with the 4-year that definitely are part of the state requirements. Is that true?
yes, the previous goal from last year talked about all students improving on the NWEA, so even minor improvement would have met that goal. What this does, I put in here the 98B goals that each of our buildings submitted for this year. If you want me to explain, or one of the principals could, they.
So these are goals, like the elementary school is a goal that Jennifer came up with based on what she had. And that's something that you're shooting for and that you think is achievable but isn't a freebie.
Correct.
And the same to the other 2 principles. I like this.
I don't know.
Because I don't know, I'm ignorant, I don't know what's their goal and not. So if these 3 ladies are saying this is a fair goal, and you agree with them, then
I do.
I think we should have a goal like that. What do you guys think?
I hear everybody.
Yes, that was great. That was great.
Although we do
That
have
was easy.
a teacher here in the building high school. I think we should make high school math much more difficult. Change the NWA for that particular.
Superintendent Stellar will find out tomorrow if gold is at us.
Oh,
No, and I do appreciate them. Obviously, we're going through this, but thank you to those who put in the effort to gather the data, because it gives me a little bit more of, I don't know, positive feel when we collectively do this, and not just us throwing out random things that we think are attainable. And I'm happy you guys are able to put together the information for us, because sometimes we're just throwing things out, and I feel like, well, is that really something that they can handle, or is it something that's not even possible?
No.
And so I appreciate that.
I will tell you that these are their end of year goals. The legislation also required a mid-year goal, which they also set. And they will be reporting on those they have to report at the board meeting in February on those goals. And so they will be reporting to you on how they did on these goals in February. And then on the end of year goals, which these are in June.
My only concern, not to get too far into the weeds, but it seems like the high school is making it's either much easier to get a growth target in high school, or they're making it much harder themselves. And B, only half the students meeting their growth targets seems kind of low to me without understanding the system. So those are my two concerns.
Well,
Jamie would like to speak. No, that's
She raised her hand,
absolutely.
like a good
So
person she is.
specifically with NWEA, when you have a high achieving student, their growth score is going to be a smaller value than a student who is significantly below grade level. So when you have a significantly below grade level student, their growth score could be 6 to 7 points, where this student may only have a 1 to 2 point growth value because they're already achieving above grade level. So while it does, those aren't numbers that I really struggled with providing the numbers that I gave you specifically for my building, but when you look at the building overall, that's just where they're at this point. And we talked a lot about things that will help address those pieces as we move forward over several years. When you look at curriculum alignment, resource alignment, those are all huge factors in the gaps that some of our kids are just like. And so that's kind of why the numbers seem so low, is because you have this chunk of kids below, you have this chunk of kids above, you have your middle group that's a typical year's growth is 4 to 5 points for any given student.
So can you just explain what projected growth is for them?
So if I scored a 215, my projected growth is a 219 for mid-year. Or it could be a 219 at end of year, depending on what subject I'm at and how I relate to the 3-year average growth for the NWEA national score.
So the test gives them this projected growth for each student. In other words, they take the test and then it tells us this is where they are now. We project by mid-year they're going to be here. So this 50% means that half of our kids have completed where they were projected to be. The others might just be just short, but they didn't make it where we projected that
But
they
they
should.
could have grown and just not made it to their projection. So if their projection was 4 points, but they only grew 2, they're still growing, just not to the projected rate in which it's determined by the test.
You know, these tests are, here I go again, because I don't know the NWA. These tests are pre-test and then post-test? So what is the assessment?
They're a benchmark assessment. It's it is not it's a benchmark assessment. They are assessed 3 times a year: fall, winter, and spring. And it also gives us a projection of what they would do on the MSTEP or the PSAT as well. So we use them to guide our instruction in terms of, okay, this is the area in which your curriculum that these students are weak in. So these are how are we going to target those students and help us do better in those areas prior to them taking that high state test in April or May.
See, I'm still a little confused. If you're not testing them, how do you assess them to say they've improved in this area 2 or 4 points?
You are testing them, you're
Yes.
testing them in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring.
Yes, okay.
You assess, we assess
So
them.
there's actually 3 tests the students take.
Yes.
Right, and it's electronic, done on their iPad. It's testing just on what they're supposed to, the benchmarks they have for that grade level, where they're at right now, where they're supposed to be, and it tells you at what level they're, but we'll also tell our teachers that maybe a particular set of benchmarks or a particular benchmark, all our students are low on. And so the teachers then can direct their instruction to bring the students up in that particular area.
I got it.
Anything else on the WEA goals? Do we have any other things you want to add for academic goals? Jen, you're still there, right?
I'm still here.
Okay.
I would just like to say I love the third goal, or whatever the last goal is, the behavior. Thank you, Chris, for adjusting that, because man, we did exactly what Kyle said. We did our best. We threw a whole bunch of stuff on the wall and said, we hope a lot of this sticks. So nice work on that last one.
Good, thank you.
Well, thank you, Jen, for jumping ahead to number 3.
Sorry. I may or may
No,
not be trying to get this meeting done a little bit faster.
Okay, well, thank you. There's another reason it's gonna go faster here in a second, but, okay, so number 3, district, has appropriate systems in place to support positive behavior. So we already talked about what Jared Bedell inventory is. I think we have goals for each building. And James has provided input on that as well, it sounds like.
Yes.
And for principals that at least understand what they're being asked to do, and it doesn't really change their day-to-day efforts of what they're already doing, right?
Correct.
I just was wondering, did you guys have input on these numbers as well as to what you think your building can do? Okay, I was just curious about that. I just had a question. Are you done with A? So I can ask about B.
Yes.
Can I please go to B, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So the district-wide climate survey, is that, who does that include? Is that teachers and staff? Is it teachers, staff, students? Is it teachers, staff, students, family? Does it include community too? I mean, what is district-wide? What is that definition?
That is a good question. Haven't had a lot of time to dig into this since last Tuesday.
Right.
Okay, so I have been looking for a way to actually measure our climate and what it's like. And when I talked with James this morning, I asked him about because the Swiss company has a climate survey as well. And he indicated to me that we did a climate survey at the end of the year last year. But I think he might have misunderstood what I was asking about because in the discussion, because then he was going to email me the results. I wanted to see the results, but the survey that he emailed me was not a climate survey. And so he might have misunderstood what I was talking about. So there are different climate surveys available. I know that PBIS has a climate survey. I don't know exactly if it, I know it's going to address students and staff. I don't know if it addresses parents or not. Do you know?
Well, I know that, there is a parent survey.
Really?
There are separate, like, I know the elementary's gonna do one at, parent-teacher conferences next week. We did one my first year, but not last year. And a lot of the questions in there are from the PBIS, survey.
So you've got questions from that survey, but it's not that actual.
No, because I mixed them with the ones that MD recommends.
So I didn't put a specific survey here because I just haven't had time to identify an exact what survey we would use. So I'm going to look at what the PBIS has. And I did a lot of reading this weekend about different climate surveys that are available. Some free, some not free.
Is that something you think you'd be able to get back with us on at our
Yes,
regular October meeting?
I will try to, yes.
If not,
Yeah,
just say
I'll
if,
try to.
that you can't and we, or you know, don't have time for it, and we can address it at another time.
Right now, my difficulty is that I have neglected my old job for a while. And Jen is being kind to me by not, Jennifer's being kind to me about their elementary grades report cards, which I spent about 5 hours working on Sunday night trying to get, some things done. So I've got some tech stuff that I've got to deal with. As a priority right now, that's really
Sure.
their grades and report cards are, but I will put that on to try to narrow that. If it's not by October, it will be by the next meeting for sure.
That sounds fine.
Can I ask you a quick question, because I always ask quick questions? Is the climate improving in the school buildings from what some of the reports were from last year from some of the teachers? Is it a different kind of climate? Is it getting better? Is it worse? What is your evaluation?
I would be the wrong person to ask about that. I wouldn't want to say. I'm getting along fine with everybody. So.
I'm talking about students.
But I don't know. I wouldn't want to answer that. You'd have to ask principals and staff and so on.
Do the principals see climate improving?
Still early.
And so that's increasing school spirit at the high school and just involvement in extracurricular stuff, which is nice. I don't know if it's due to some restrictions might be enough or what the big push, how they come be, but it's been a nice change. The freshman classes that came with a lot of positive energy.
I think that right now there's been so much disruption and turmoil with COVID and everything and we're still going through that it's going to be expected that there are going to be bumps. And I would hope that, because the kids are back without their masks and we can have things like homecoming activities and things like that. I would hope that would improve the climate from last year, but what I'm interested in is when we do this at the end of the year is, seeing where we are at the end of the year. And then from there we can look at how can we improve it the following year and just try to get better every year.
One of the places I worked before, they used to Gallup. They loved Gallup. One of the things that I actually thought was a good tool was the Gallup climate survey, which it asked, I guess, 12 years ago, so 5 questions that show level of engagement for all employees. Like, I know what I need to do every day. I have tools I need to do every day. I've been told the last year that I did a good job. I plan on working here again next year. I have a best friend at work. There's like half a dozen questions. I thought actually the best friend one not so much, but the other ones I thought were relevant. But I'm sure it costs money, so just another tool you can look at. That would only be for employees and employer relationships. So. But is that, take a look at it. All right, any other goals? I know, so we had talked about 2 that are lingering in my mind. One was curriculum, which I think we kind of covered in his personal goals. One thing we haven't really discussed is special ed. I don't know if we want to make that a goal at some time, or how we would do that, or what would be appropriate there. I'm just throwing that out there.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what you want to address in regard to special education?
That fall under
Well,
the
our special ed population is almost double that of the state average, so I think it would be more of a, we're gonna look at this and then we're going to determine, is it are we identifying students? Are we not implementing our tier 2, tier 3 strategy? I think it's more of an investigative at this point to figure out why we think that this number is the way it is, and then, okay, let's put some interventions in place. And I agree with Darren, that has been on our radar for another number of years, so I think it needs to be at least, maybe it's embedded in the achievement, maybe it's embedded in the PBIS.
But let me, I was notified last week, and I'm going to be meeting with, you mean names, Eric. Mean names. I'm going to be meeting with Eric next week. That we're going to be all of our special ed is going to be audited this year, and they will be here and doing a complete, thorough, top-to-bottom examination of every aspect of special education. And he's going to meet with me, like I said, next week to give me more details on what that entails. He suggested it would take place sometime early next calendar year. I'm thinking February, something like that. So you're aware that is something that's taking place, and that might help us get to. But I think that came out of the request that was made at the end of the year for Haley to have a halftime position as a special education, what do they call that position? Site? Yeah. Yeah, something like that. And apparently some other schools do have those, but when that request went through and they began to look at the request, instead of granting that request, they turned it down and decided they were going to audit us instead. So, so we will have a report coming later this year, this school year, that will, in great detail, maybe help us identify, where we are with our special education and the processes that we're using. I don't know, does that help, John?
It sounds,
Sorry,
go ahead, Jen.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, to me, it would be good to know what the results are of the audit before we try to put things going into that. Let's see where we are, and then we can make adjustments accordingly. That's kind of how I see it. So if we could get what the information is, maybe that can be a goal for next school year.
Yeah, I mean, the audit sounds like it's gonna identify the things we were just talking about anyways, and the things that are important, what processes are we using, how effective are they, things like that. So, I mean, it's gonna kind of, where I think we should start is probably what that audit's gonna show anyway, so.
Well, it'd definitely be useful information to begin that process.
You asked a question a few minutes ago about what we're looking for, and Jen mentioned one of them is our percent of kids who are with a special education label or need. The other piece of it, from a first perspective, and I don't know how to say this politically, so I'm just going to try to say it. I think there were areas that I personally saw, areas of improvement that we could make in our special education department, just with how the teachers interact with the special education instructors and expectations. And I know there are meetings that take place, and that takes a lot of work, but it just seemed like the teachers didn't have enough time, or didn't have the
Teachers' interaction.
the training to fully implement some of the things that they were supposed to do, and it just seemed like there were some gaps there. That's all.
And when you have that high of a percentage too, it's very difficult. IEPs are very time consuming and all that. So I mean, there's a lot of, part of figuring out why that percentage is high is gonna probably alleviate some of that stuff too. It's very time consuming to get all that around and communicate back and forth and prepare for meetings and all that stuff too, and set forth all the things that are set in the IEP for each student. When you have that high of a percentage, it's the task.
It is a lot. I mean, one of the things I did starting out this year was make it so that all the special education teachers could take a half day and get a sub each month so they can work on a lot of the paperwork and things they have to do, because otherwise, I mean, it's overwhelming, it really is. And it actually, all the documentation, everything they have to do means that it's much more difficult to have the time that they need to focus on preparing and working with the students, because they're spending all their time doing all this documentation paperwork, even taking them out of the classroom for a sub to be able to work on it, creates a problem. So I know I would not want to be in that position, having to do that. It's a lot.
I still think I would add it somewhere in the district goals, even if it's just a blurb about, what was the word you used earlier, Dave? Develop, identify, something, so that when we circle back to these goals next year, we remind ourselves, oh yeah, we were gonna address this. I just don't wanna drop this ball.
So I agree. Identify areas of potential improvement or areas of concern or areas of, I'm never good at writing group papers.
Let me write something up.
Okay.
And I'll send it out to you, and you can read it and see what you think, and we can make adjustments and have it ready for the meeting in October. Does that make sense?
No, and I would just add it in the academic portion, Chris.
Okay.
Student achievement portion, Jen.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other goals you want to have for the district? You think of one you're really passionate about? Please let Chris know before next meeting. Hopefully we can approve both his goals and the superintendent goals and the district goals at the next meeting. That would be the goal. Sorry. Okay.
That's goals.
All right. There is no board discussion, but however, the purpose of having a committee of the whole meeting is so we don't have 15 million committee meetings throughout the month, which is nice. So is there anything else we want to talk about or bring up or discuss as we're all here and do it legally? You're rushing to get done by 8:20 and it just kind of all happened. Fell into place.
No, I mean, even like facility, I always think about facilities, but it's part of getting the goals, just things like that, making progress towards some of those things that are important.
I do have a question.
Yes.
In talking with Mike this morning from Performance Services, he said that usually when they begin to work with the school district, they work with a subcommittee of the board on talking about the projects. I told him that you've been meeting as a committee of the whole, and so I just wondered if you want to, because he said they do that as well. The projects they're working on with Jonesville right now, they meet with the entire board to work on it. If that's how you want to continue, we would try to do it that way.
That would be my recommendation, just because I know that I'm not on the buildings committee, but I want a good understanding of what's going on. So I can answer questions if someone asks me a question.
Speaking of committees, you mentioned recreating a committee or something that was a little more private to talk about contracts, et cetera.
Yeah, like personnel.
Yeah.
How do I say this? I think it's a great idea, but I'm not sure I have time to be on it, so.
Well, I mean, it could just be, we've done that in the past, where we just have maybe whoever can join and.
Ad hoc.
Yep, thank you. That's what I was looking for. An ad hoc, just something that we can actually, in that particular moment, say who's available, who can help out. It doesn't have to be a set amount of people or anything like that, so.
Right now, I don't see anything. I think most of that'll come up as we get into next.
I just want to share that we support that. I'll say that's great.
That's great.
It is.
It would be helpful when
I also
start to negotiate and think about those things, to have a group to bounce those ideas off and make sure that we're all on the same page, instead of just having to come into the board cold with these contracts. And
so when you're ready to do those things, I guess board meeting, just ask who's available, you know, to me, or if that doesn't work, do it via email, whatever. We'll make it happen.
Sounds good.
I also think we should have a snack committee, and Paul is in charge of the snack committee.
I might have time carrying on
We-
for a while.
We don't have another public comment, but your hand's raised and it's only polite and you have a few minutes, so.
I apologize for not getting it when you started, I got here as quick as I can. Maybe you wanna put me on next meeting's agenda to ask a couple of questions. I have kids in the district and, I have just a couple of quick questions, if you wanna address them now, or do you wanna put me on next week's agenda?
Well, if you have a question, you can ask anyone outside of the meeting. If you have something you wanted to publicly say to the board, then I guess the most appropriate time would be at the next school board meeting.
I don't have anything I wanna say, I just have a question, but I'm not sure board members would be able to answer.
I'll be happy to try.
We can talk about it after the meeting, I think.
I'll ask for a second.
Perfect. All right, anything else? All those in favor of adjourning the COW meeting and having all of the head of the snack committee, please strike the last statement from the record. All those who are in favor of adjourning the meeting, please raise your hand and say aye. Opposed? All right.
I didn't need a motion and support for that.
You know,
I'll
Yeah.
motion it.
Support. I got ahead of
Thank
myself, sorry.
You just got so excited about it.
We're all in favor, I got that part.
Get them both ahead of the motion.
Jen's on the computer, I got nervous, she was here. So we had motion and support, let's have a vote to adjourn the meeting, all those in favor